Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle and today I'm going to be talking about my plans for November in our homeschool, specifically our unit study, because November is Native American Heritage Month, so we always choose to do a focus in the month of November on Indigenous people, and that's looked different throughout the years. And you can check out previous videos of what we've talked about, what resources I've used. So for this year, I was looking over some of the resources I've used in the past and kind of gave me an idea of what I wanted to focus on this year. And when doing that, I realized we have covered a lot of material. We've done different unit studies from different, like I said, resources. I think I tried to do 3 different last year and I accomplished that, and that's a lot. But I think we've done a really good job covering lots of different issues. And especially with history, we've done United States history last year and we're doing it again this year, and a big part of that last year was because we used Freedom curriculum that kind of focused on the other perspective of history. We did get a lot of read alouds and things that involved Indigenous tribes, and this year, even though we're using core knowledge, which is more of a streamlined history curriculum, we're still using primary source documents, polling information, really talking about the impact that the formation of the United States and the continuation of the United States has had on tribal nations. So we have covered a lot of information, which I'm really proud of. So what I wanted to focus on this particular November was discussing the things we've talked about. So I feel like my kids have a wealth of knowledge because we've covered a lot of things over the years. So I really want to poll on that and just have some open discussion. And I'm going to be using books to facilitate that discussion. So I'm going to turn you around and show you kind of the resources I've picked up and how I plan on using them. So for November, we have 3 weeks of homeschool. So we take the week of Thanksgiving off because we host Thanksgiving. And because of my daughter's celiac disease, I pretty much make everything from scratch. So it's a lot, and it takes a lot of prep work. So that being in mind, that is our normal scheduled time off in November. So we have 3 weeks of time to cover. So that kind of helps narrow down how much time I have to fit the resources that I want to use in. And if you're new to my channel, I have an 11-year-old in 6th grade. I have by the time this video goes up, an 8-year-old who is doing 2nd, 3rd grade work, and a 4-year-old in preschool. So I'm gonna flip you around and show you kind of my plans for November. So to start, I'm going to be using this, and I've talked about it in my past November videos as well. This is Thanksgiving, a Native Perspective. I found this at Birch Bark Books. I bought it online because they're not local to me, but it is a small independently owned bookstore run by Native people, and they sell books written by Native people and different things that Native people create. And this is something I picked up a couple years ago, and we have continued to use it. So you can see here I have some Post-its on top. So I've marked what we have left to use, and I've marked it by the week. So like I said, we had 3 weeks. So for week 1, we're going to be talking about the corn spirit. So again, this is traditional tale. And then this is an activity discussion to go with corn. And then for the same thing, we're going to be talking about companions and core borers, kind of how Indigenous people viewed corn, one of the 3 sisters, and how colonists viewed corn. They saw it as feed for animals, and it kind of brings in different perspectives and primary source documents for that. So I really want to talk about that because one of the things we're going to be covering is kind of nature and how that is an essential part of Indigenous tribes and culture. So that will be week 1, and I'll show you the books that will go with that in a little bit as well. So week 2, we're going to be looking at feast. Now we've gone over the Great Harvest, we've gone over all of those things in the past. So again, I'm just using the resources we haven't covered and bringing in the information we have. So, retrieval practice there. So we're going to talk about community feast, harvest celebrations, which I have books for that will go on as well. And then my father-in-law, who is a high school teacher, likes to send me, National Geographic articles and things like that he thinks the kids would like. So he sent me this last year. We didn't get a chance to go through it, but I thought since we're talking about feast and harvest, I bring this in and talk about, turkeys. history of Thanksgiving in reference to turkeys, how turkeys came into being, why we eat them. So I thought that would be interesting for my kids. And the last one is a student activity. So we're going to be looking at some primary and secondary sources, and in reference to the first Thanksgiving. So this first one, we're going to look at William Bradford's journal. Second one, The Saints Come Sailing In. Third one, The First Thanksgiving. And it's got discussion questions, pretty much lesson plan in here for you to follow. And it's got the primary source documents in there. And it's got the questions. But we did not get to this specific activity last year. So again, my kids are very knowledgeable about the first Thanksgiving. We've debunked the myths of it. So I feel like they will be more prepared to have discussion on this than they were in previous years. So that's kind of the basis of what we're finishing from previous years. And I will show you kind of the books that we plan on bringing in to help facilitate some of that discussion. One thing I did want to mention that, of course, I've talked about in the past as well, especially since my 4-year-old is joining us this year, we do have this coloring page, and the art is original from different native tribes. Still he'll have the opportunity to color some of this. I just make copies from this book. Same with this, the storytelling coloring book. Again, this is from Birch Bark Books. And I don't show the inside of this because the first page says, please don't share this unless you purchased it. So I don't show the inside of this. But again, my son will have an opportunity to have some coloring, even my 8-year-old if she wants to color. But both my girls have used these before. But can always bring them in. So some of the books. So like I said, I wanted to start discussion. So I have 2 piles here. I have just kind of representation. So all the authors I'm going to show are native authors. And again, I found a long list on that Birch Bark Books website. They have all the books you can purchase there. I just went through and kind of looked at what my library had. So this is Birdsong. And this is focusing on nature and art, which again is a theme I want to cover, kind of the relationship between nature, art, or nature and spirituality, especially in indigenous tribes. So we're going to be talking about this one, but I think this is good representation as well. So we'll read a chunk of the books I have when we do our study and have some really good discussion. This one is new. And again, I wanted representation. So for this one, they're going to visit their family on a reservation. And it just shows different family dynamics. And again, I like we're being inclusive. We're showing different types of family systems. Same with this one, Too Much, My Great Big Native Family. Again, representation. Forever Cousins, and these are 2 native girls, and one ends up leaving the reservation with her family and moving to the city, while the other one stays. And it talks about their different experiences, and then when they come back for a family reunion, I believe they talk about will they still be the same girls they were now that they've had different experiences. So again, I like the representation, and this is something that my 8-year-old can read. So this is something I picked out specifically for her. Stolen Words. And this is about a grandfather and his granddaughter. They go for a walk, and she asks how to say a specific word. The grandfather can't remember it. She's like, well, why can't you remember how to say that word in their native tongue? And he talks about how he was taken from his family, sent to the boarding schools, and all of their culture was eradicated from them. Their hair was cut. They weren't allowed to speak in their native tongue. And again, we've talked about those schools in the past, and we've read books about them, so we're going to use this as a way to have further discussion on that topic. Because like I said, my kids know a lot. I want to discuss what we know and what we think and really get them to do some of that critical thinking now that they have a really good background knowledge on it. And then this one is We Belong to the Drum. And this just goes through a child's experience growing up Native. And again, I like the inclusive nature of it. We're not just showing one group of people here. again, my daughter, my 8-year-old, can read a lot of these books now this year. So the other one is more tales or the nature theme. So this is Where We Come From. And this is kind of explaining, you know, the relationship and spirituality that comes with nature and the importance of that in indigenous tribes. Then in the terms of tales, How Chipmunk Got His Stripes, I think my kids will like this because we've gone over a lot of different, especially in this book, traditional native stories. So I think my younger two will like this. Because, you know, we've read, you know, how Bear Guy's Tale and all that. So this is definitely aimed at my younger two. And then the other one that kind of goes along with that as well is Turtles Race with Beaver. Again, one of those traditional stories that would have been handed down orally from generation to generation. And I like about these is that they incorporate native art as well. So those are kind of aimed at my two younger children. So what am I doing for my 11-year-old? So she's definitely older and capable of more. So some of the, besides the Thanksgiving perspective, again, I want to pull on nature, spirituality, and this is the gift of indigenous knowledge. And we've touched a little bit on this in the past. What this is talking about: water knowledge, fire and smoke, indigenous knowledge, food security, healing, sky, keeping the knowledge. I thought this was really cool. So we will do this one, the entire book, not just sections of it. But the gift of it, I think this is going to help kind of give and I think my oldest will especially like this because she's very interested in nature and conservation, things like that. I think being able to combine, you know, science, nature, and spirituality is really cool and amazing. So I think she'll really enjoy this. But we're going to go through this cover to cover. And then another thing is Braiding Sweetgrass for young adults. There's an older version for adults as well, but this is for the young adults. Indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teachings of plants. Again, that follows the theme I want for this year that we're talking about, that this is specifically combining science, spirituality, and nature, and the knowledge that can be learned from that. And it's really cool. This is one I've already read and gone through. We will not go through every section of this just because, one, my kids are familiar with some of this. So, for example, my kids are familiar with the Three Sisters, the Honorable Harvest. They're familiar with those stories and the concepts. So we're not going to be going over that. But for example, The Gift of Strawberries, we do have a book on our bookshelf where it's the story of how strawberries came into existence from a native perspective. So we'll do that. But I love that it's talking about the science of these plants as well. And I was reading through specifically the one about regrowing cedar trees and all the things cedar trees are used for. So I think it's a really cool way of combining all these. And again, I think my oldest will be really into that. So we'll be doing certain areas of this when we're going through it. And then the books specific for my oldest that I picked for her. So this one is Res Dogs. And this is about a girl. She's visiting her grandparents on the reservation. COVID-19 breaks out. She has to stay with her parents or her grandparents on the reservation during the COVID outbreak. And this is in verse style, so I think it's really easy to read. But I picked this out for her. And then it's funny, I picked out this next one for her. And she told me she already read it. So I was like, oh, okay. But I figured I'd show it to you in case you need ideas. This is Two Tribes. And it's about a girl. Her parents One is Jewish and one is Native, and kind of her experience with it. Again, a lot of these are graphic novels, so they're quick, easy reads, but I do think it provides good representation and the duality of, when you come from two different cultures. And then I picked up this one for her, another graphic novel. This is a girl called Echo. And it goes through her experience, so you can see, and I read this one. I read through it fully. Because some of these are aimed at young adult, and being 11, I have to be mindful that there are certain things she's quite not ready for. But she's sitting in class and she's thinking about these things instead of paying attention. She's very in touch with her, indigenous side. And the book just kind of goes through between those stories of the past and what's happening right now. And I do like that it has these little sections right here. And it does have a timeline as well. But I think it's a good way because, again, we've gone over different things. I want to bring real life stories into it, representation, so she can have a better, it's one thing to read about, indigenous tribes, but I want her to have a connection to it and see the people behind that as well. So that is one she'll be reading. And then the last one I got was This Place, 150 Years Retold. And this is really interesting because it's about the past 150 years through the eyes of the indigenous creators in this graphic novel. What's really interesting is they kind of have it from the perspective of a post-apocalyptic world, which is really interesting because when you think about it, what happened to indigenous tribes, it really is post-apocalyptic, that their entire culture was almost completely eradicated and they had to fight for survival. So I enjoyed that perspective. I think that was an interesting way of doing it. Now for this one, she's not going to read all of them because I did read through these, and there are some that I think are a bit much for her. Again, I think this is aimed for high school. So there's one I think about a Wendigo, there's an evil spirit that possesses people and it turns them into cannibals. I think that's a little beyond her right now. I do think, it's not the cannibalism, but it's understanding the symbolism behind that she's not quite ready for. But there are stories in here she can absolutely read now. And I will mark those for her, the ones that I think she will either enjoy or be beneficial. But I'm not going to have her read this one cover to cover just because there are some harsher things. Yeah, this is the Wendigo one. That I don't think she's quite ready, and I don't think she's at the point where she'd understand it for what it is. I think she'd take it a little too literally. But I do like how there's different graphic representations in here as well. Different styles. So for example, this will be one that I have her read, Warrior Nation. It just goes through, historically. So that is my plan for November. And again, I want to have an emphasis on talking about the things we've covered, really bringing out those thinking skills in my kids that they've been presented with the information. Now I want them to think about it critically. And focusing on nature and spirituality and how important that is to indigenous tribes and what we can learn from that. I think that would be really interesting. So if you have any specific questions, leave them in the comments below. If not, thank you for watching.